Today, there are 2 million descendants of French-Canadian immigrants living in New England. These are our stories. Welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Venez tous jeunes filles et garçons, je vais vous raconter l'histoire de notre immigration ici au USA, de grands aventuriers, de pays étrangers.
This is the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast. I am Jesse Martineau. Now, this week's episode is an episode I am particularly excited about. Not only is the topic something that has come up multiple times in this podcast, though never actually explored, but this week we will be speaking with a couple of guests, including reconnecting with Juliana L'Heureux. Now, at the time I'm recording this episode, we have released over 100 episodes. We've had more than 140,000 total listens. Yet the very first person I interviewed for this podcast was Juliana L'Heureux. Now, her initial interview was released as episode...
I had not heard that before.
100% true. Quick reintroduction. Juliana L'Heureux is a freelance writer who publishes news, blogs, and articles about Franco-Americans and French culture. She's been telling our story for over 30 years. And this time we were very, very excited because Juliana is joined by Dr. Christian Potholm. Dr. Potholm is the D'Alva Stanwood Alexander Professor of Government Emeritus at Bowdoin College. He has written a number of books on Maine politics, as well as various dimensions of war and warfare. He has been quoted by a ton of media outlets, including the New York Times, Congressional Quarterly, Newsweek, ABC, Bloomberg News, the Boston Globe, National Public Radio, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, the Washington Post. If I list them all, we would be here all day. But I did want to highlight that on that list is New England Cable News, the entity that once ran a story calling my hometown of Manchester, New Hampshire, the most Irish city in America, which did provide a lot of motivation for me to start up this podcast. Dr. Potholm, welcome to the French Canadian Legacy Podcast. Juliana, of course, welcome back. Very glad to have you guys.
Thank you for having us.
This is going to be fun.
Thank Chris. So you're going to be able to put this on that extraordinary resume too.
There you go.
I'll put this at the top of the list. This will knock the New York Times out of first place.
I appreciate that. Well, maybe we could get your story, Dr. Potholm. Before we get going, we always kind of like to get an idea of who our guests are, where they came from. So maybe just give us your background, kind of where you're from. How did you determine that you were going to dedicate your life to studying political science?
Well, I was born and grew up in Connecticut, but I came to Maine every Christmas to be with my cousin. And so I had a great romantic view of Maine. And when I had a chance to go to Bowdoin College, when I was in high school, I jumped at the opportunity. And I had 4 years at Bowdoin, and then I decided to go into college teaching. I taught 2 years at Dartmouth and a couple of years at Vassar. And then a position opened up back at Bowdoin. And so I came here in 1970. And in 1972, Bill Cohen, my classmate, was running for Congress. He asked me to be his campaign manager, although I had no experience. And we both learned on the job, got involved in Maine politics. And then in 1980, I worked on my first referendum here in Maine. And it was to close the Maine Yankee nuclear plant. I learned very quickly how different ballot measures are from candidate campaigns, and I fell in love with the differences. And I then, for the next 40 years, I specialized really in ballot measures and referenda. I was a senior advisor to Angus King when he ran as an independent, and then during John Baldacci's second term as governor, I also was a senior strategist. So I've seen a lot of politics in Maine. And as Julie suggests, in 1972, when I looked around at the way Bill Cohen could possibly win, I noticed in the polling there were these people called Franco-Americans. And although a majority of them were in the Democratic Party or independent, I found that many of their values were exactly the same as small town Republican business people. And then, of course, as you know very well, the Franco-American community is chock full of male and female entrepreneurs and small business people. I was very fortunate because in 1972, that was the first year Franco-Americans were able to vote in Maine without voting a straight party ticket. They got rid of the big box. So all of a sudden the Francos were in play. Bill Cohen's father was the baker. My father was a carpenter. We were, blue collar kids. And we understood. We'd go into places and Franco-American people would tell us the problems they were having, whether it was with the government or the people or the media or whatever. And it was remarkably similar to our backgrounds. And so I think we had an affinity for the Franco-Americans. They looked to be the perfect target group because we needed to pry away from the Democratic Party enough Franco-Americans so that Bill could win. In Maine, as you know, there are 22% of the voters are Franco-Americans. And as I say, the interesting thing about them that was borne out subsequently, we've only had two independent governors in Maine, and both of them were elected with the same coalition, which was urban Franco Democrats and small town Republicans. That's the only way you can get elected in Maine as an independent, and other things have to happen, but that's the basic coalition. And what we discovered over time, when I got into ballot measures, was that the Franco-Americans determined the outcome of just about every election. So the book that we just published called How Maine Decides, if I could magically give free copies away, I would just love to have every Franco-American family read this book, because the chapter 3 is all about how important the Francos are. Since 1972, they've determined the outcome of virtually every election. If they voted against the widening of the Maine Turnpike, which they did the first time, it failed. And when they voted for it, the second time it came up, it passed. The same thing is true of gay marriage. Gay marriage was defeated the first time around because the majority of Franco-Americans voted against it. But 4 or 5 years later, when it came back, Franco-Americans had decided that they wanted to support gay marriage. So I can give you example after example where the Francos, they made the difference. And in all these years when I go around, and I'm sure Julie has had the same experience, the number one blockage for Franco-Americans is somehow thinking they don't have this power. When you tell them you can determine this, they don't believe you. Okay,
That's right.
And I'm sure culturally, there's all kinds of reasons, historically and whatnot. But the truth of it is, Franco-Americans can flex their muscles because they can determine the outcome. Now, everybody's talking about the presidential race, and everybody's talking about the 2nd District Maine congressional race. Both of those could be very close, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it's very simple. The Franco-Americans will either choose Joe Biden or his replacement, or Donald Trump. And they'll either go for Golden in the 2nd District, or they'll go for his NASCAR opponent. But if I could just share the empowerment, the hope, the dream really I have, is that Franco-Americans could realize the power they have. And I don't have to tell either of you how sometimes Francos are their own worst enemy. Oh, he's a Franco from the St. John Valley. Well, I'm a Franco from Lewiston. I don't want him to win. But Francos united, that's the ticket to success.
And this is really
that's because, Chris, as you know, ethnic discrimination against the Francos has gone back, for 400 years since the loss of Canada and the immigrant experience. They were subject to Ku Klux Klan and language discrimination. And so when anyone sells the Franco-Americans as a group, you have real value. You really are important. You make a difference. It is unbelievable from their 5,000 foot level, but it is so true. And you are the one that, seriously, I have given him accolades over the decades. The only one who's put a magnifying glass on this. You should get a Nobel Prize for it.
Or at least a Franco-American of the Year vote, yeah.
Well, Julie was kind enough in one of her columns to called me, what was it? And a wannabe Franco.
I love
Yeah.
that.
but seriously, I think it's so important that the Franco-Americans realize the power that they have, and how from a not just the psychology of it, but the psychographics, the way they look at the world and whatnot. When they focus on we want this and we don't want that, they determine so much of public policy. But as you know, and it's probably true in New Hampshire and Rhode Island and other places, they tend to be in communities, and sometimes those communities that are all Franco-American, or mostly Franco-American, they don't see eye to eye. And so I think to get a statewide Franco-American vote, you have to go to a lot of different places. You have to appeal to them in the way you would small town Republicans. They often agree with the same influence vectors. And as you know, there's no bigger promoter of Franco-Americans in Maine than Julie. And she's seen it up close and personal. And when a candidate goes and spends time, he or she can make enormous inroads. And Franco-American voters are very discriminating. In our last gubernatorial race, we had a Franco, Paul LePage, running against Janet Mills, and she destroyed him in the Franco-American community. I mean, she got a majority. This is the first time that I was able to track. She got more Franco-American votes statewide than the Franco-American candidate. And as a result, she won, and won overwhelmingly. So starting in 1972 and ending so far in 2022, it's all there. The Francos, one of the chapter in the book that I wish all Francos could read is called, Long Live the Francos, and the Franco-Americans make the difference. And they just don't get the, it's very interesting. We had a hard fought Senate race here against Susan Collins, a woman named Sarah Gideon. And, the Gideon people, they didn't even know there were Franco-Americans. Oh, there was some festival down in Biddeford, but, it was a campaign of yuppies, for yuppies, by yuppies. They'd never paid any attention to the Franco-Americans. She had a very good chance of winning, but she obviously threw it away. And Susan Collins, who followed Bill Cohen and followed Olympia Snow and followed Angus King and so on, she recognized how important it was to take her story to the Franco-Americans and listen to them. So I think to a candidate or to a cause, that would be my number one piece of advice. Seek out the Francos, see what their take is, and try to explain to them why they're important and why you need them. And they are very discerning. As I said, they go back and forth depending on the issue and how it's presented.
But
it's more than just, it's also how. It's not just, well, go get the Francos. I've had so many candidates approach me, and ask me, how do you do this? But when you give them the direction, they really don't seem to internalize it, or they don't read Dr. Potholm's books. By the way, I always recommend your books, Chris. I don't know how many have read them, because they sort of want a magic wand. And it really is a matter, as you know, Jesse, that the Franco-Americans want to be recognized in their communities. And these candidates, if they, in tight elections, they need the Franco vote, they have to do like Congressman and Senator and then Secretary Cohen did. He went into the Franco communities, which everyone thought he could never be able to make headway. And he did a walk around, and he did a door to door, and it worked. And that's the kind of legwork that some of these candidates have to do. And I'm not sure that they really get that. I know that they think they do, but I haven't seen that they actually, on several occasions, have not seen them actually do it, and they lose.
That's a very good point, Julie. That you got to walk the walk and not just talk.
Right. You got to.
Say, oh, the Franco's important. I love the Francos, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't address their concerns as a candidate or with a campaign. I remember Sunday sales, Jesse. We didn't used to be able to shop at big stores on Sunday, and that was a perfect example where the small town Republicans, they wanted to be able to go and shop, and there was a lot of resentment on the part of different people who wanted to have an opportunity. And I'll never forget it. We saw the biggest swing was with the Franco-American community. We put on a commercial because the argument was, oh, Francos, they go to church. It's like they went to church all day. You know, they church, they can't shop. And so we had a couple of Franco-American women who said, in the morning we go to church, and in the afternoon, if we want to shop, it should be our choice. So it wasn't, no, you can't go to church because you can't open the stores because people are in the church. It was, we want a choice. And those Franco-American women in that commercial, they not only changed the Franco vote, but they swung. It was a very close election, like I think it was 51-49. And those Franco women pushed us over the finish line.
Yeah, for any candidate to win a statewide election or a statewide referendum in Maine, you must be able to convince the Francos to vote for it or vote against it, whichever. So it's essential. I don't know, does that translate into New Hampshire, Chris? Do you think New Hampshire runs the same way?
I would bet it does. That's off the top of my head. I've only polled in presidential primaries in New Hampshire, so I don't actually have a firm grip on that. But I have no reason to think it wouldn't be true, because they're the same Francos and they're driven by the same forces. And yes, the big waves came to work in the factories, but right after them came all this, you know, the bankers and the lawyers and the bakers and the beauty shop people and the newspaper people. I mean, I think you told me once, Julie, at some point there was like 50 or 60 Franco-American little newspapers in Maine. So I'm betting that's, Jesse, the same thing would be true in New Hampshire. But what do you think?
Something that has come up on this podcast before. The biggest event we have as Franco-Americans here in New Hampshire is a Poutine Fest. We have a giant festival for Poutine. And we've had a really tough time for a long time getting politicians to show up at this event. And that's a pretty bizarre contrast from my perspective to, there's a big Greek event every year, a Greek American event, and every politician in the world shows up for that one. U.S. Senator, governor, like U.S. congressman, all the way down to somebody who wants to be an alderman. They all show up, and a lot of them give money to be on the program for that. And when asked, you know, why is it that we're having such a tough time getting the exact same people to come to our festival, the answer we've always been given is that there's no such thing as a French vote, that the Greek vote exists, but not necessarily a French vote, that Greek Americans vote for people, not necessarily like they would go outside their normal political affiliation to vote for people who are seen as being friendly to Greeks or Greek causes. And I certainly know of a bunch of, you know, conservative Greeks who every year would vote for State Senator Lou D'Alessandro, who is definitely not Greek, but he's very liberal, but apparently he had a reputation of being a very pro-Greek individual. And so what we were told is the French equivalent doesn't exist, that we don't vote as somebody because they're good to the French people, that kind of thing.
Yes, I think that's so fascinating, because when we do our polls, we only look at 3 ethnic groups. One is the English/Yankees. That's about 35%. There's about 22% of the population is Irish, and the other 2 is Franco-American. And everybody else is all in one big box. And so people are always saying, well, how does the Greeks going to vote? I don't care. I'm half Swedish, half Danish. We don't care how they're going to vote.
Yeah.
You know, and so the Greek thing there, before we got rolling on this, you're absolutely right. You know, there are more people who went to the Greek festivals than some of the Franco-American stuff. But in the polling, we don't care about any other ethnic group, because the English and the Irish, they just dance to a different tune. The Francos, if you tell the Francos, you make your case to the Francos, and you accent the part of referendum that they are caring about, then they don't vote as a bloc, but as individuals, they respond to the cues that you bothered to send them. Whereas we don't care what all the Danish people or Swedish people in Maine, we don't care. We do care how the Francos vote.
No, I didn't realize that in New Hampshire. And when I worked in New Hampshire, the politicians were everywhere. They were everywhere. And in Maine, it's too big a state. They can't be that visible everywhere. So I'm surprised what you're saying about the Franco-American Festival. But that's where the politicians have to show up if they want the Franco vote, for sure. They have to eat the crepes. They have to even flip the crepes.
Now, I'm curious if you guys think it's going to be different going forward. Because I'm just thinking of, like, for instance, my grandfather, he was from Quebec. So I had that personal connection growing up. I knew somebody who was from Quebec. But my niece and nephew won't have that because, my grandfather is long past. So is it, 10 years from now when they're a couple of generations removed, when my niece and nephew have never been around somebody who speaks French? Like, is that vote going to be different?
That's a very good question. And Julie and I are now writing a second book with another Bowdoin professor and Dave Emery, who used to be a congressman, because we got so intrigued by the material we found for this book. So the Francos only have one chapter, but the next book is all about the Francos. It's called The Francos Ascendant. And to speak to your point, what we have now, because of big data and AI, we now have something like 20 million bit outcomes of every Maine town against every Maine town by the ethnicity from the census. So we're putting the census and the voting patterns together. And what we can say now, it's not, the data is not complete, but what we can say now is you're absolutely right that within the Franco-American community, there are 4 or 5 different subgroups, one of which I call the deracinated Franco, the one you're talking about. They don't speak the language. I don't really care. Yeah, I go to church at Christmas. They're deracinated from that tight cultural, but those are the ones who are more likely to switch their party affiliation from Democrat or Independent to Republican. Now, in Maine, if you can imagine where the St. John Valley is, that was the largest concentration of Franco-Americans in terms of this big, long valley. And that used to go for the Democrats, sometimes 7 or 8 to 1. And what's happened is now, I think, with one exception, the entire state delegation to the House and Senate in Maine are all Republicans. And Lewiston, which used to be one of the most Democratic places in Maine, now you're a Republican, you've got a pretty good chance to be elected. So yes, there are more than one Franco-Americans. But what we found so far is that whichever of these, a given candidate or a given cause might resonate more or less with the deracinated group, but net, they tend to respond to the same themes in the ballot measure. So it's very interesting to me that although you can break up the Franco community into 5 or 6 different ways of looking at them, nevertheless, there is this kind of bedrock. Well, just to talk off the top of my head in big numbers, if you think of Irish Americans that came to Massachusetts and they saw the Yankees were in power, and what they wanted to do was they wanted to be in power, so they said, well, we'll replace them in the police department and the fire department and the city council. But in Maine, that didn't happen until very, very recently. And so generally speaking, the Irish Americans tend to like big government. The Francos, Democrat, Republican, Independent, they tend to have a bias against big government. So again, depending on the issue and how you frame it, there are these lines that cross the Franco-American subcommunities.
But there is one characteristic that transcends that question, in my mind anyway. It's that regardless of where the Francos live in Maine, they tend to stay in Maine, and they move around the state of Maine. They move from, the reason I think all the Democrats left Aroostook County is they all moved to Cumberland County, but they stayed in Maine, and they have very, very strong familial connections with their roots. So if they grew up in a family that had traditions that might have been liberal, or that might have been religious, or might have been conservative, those family groups are very influential. You know that, Jesse. You know how tight the communities are. And I think that it holds the whole community of Francos together, even in their parochial family units. They don't tend to, we learned that when the Governor LePage appointed a Franco-American task force, and Chris did the survey data with the University of Maine for that legislative group to find out where Francos live. And this was back, about 2011 or so, and he wrote a book about it. But the thing that we learned is that while the Irish leave the state altogether, or if they stay, they don't have any children, so they don't generate another generation. The Francos stay in Maine, and they continue to have children, and they continue to keep very strong family units. And I think that those traditions transcend any political divisions that are disruptive. So if a family tends to be conservative, they tend to stay conservative. They are not, and vice versa.
Yeah,
that's just my opinion, though. I have no data like Chris has. Chris is a data guy, and he can get all the data to back his up. But I'm just talking, from sort of a sociological perspective.
I think you're 100% right, Julie. I'm glad you brought that up. That is a very important set of distinctions that distinguish the Franco-Americans from either the Irish or the English. That's exactly right.
I find this entire conversation refreshing, because having been told, empowering, that again, the Franco vote is not really happening. We've told for a very long time that Franco-Americans are less and less likely to identify with their culture. More and more of the time, the next generation of Franco-American, a lot of them don't even realize they're Franco-American. They don't have no idea why their last name ends in an EAU. So, or in one of the things we had talked about in the very first episode, Juliana, is we struggle to even identify what to call ourselves. The whole idea that we can make a major difference politically, and that we're someone who should be treated, we're a group that should be treated like we can make a big difference politically, I think is very, very interesting.
If any of those people who can't seem to find their way in the culture, if they ever use the word, well, my meme said, that's it.
Exactly.
I mean, that is truly it. I mean, they definitely know that, but they just never had the opportunity to maybe explore it, or they haven't been given that opportunity. Educationally, the Francos have never been in the mainstream of public education. They've been largely parochial school. And then in public education, they really don't learn about their culture. That's a big problem. But if they use words like meme and, the little colloquialisms that the French use, then they're Franco.
Or if they have a pork pie on their on Christmas, it's probably
pork pie,
pretty good chance. Yeah.
What percentage of the population in New Hampshire identifies as Franco-American?
I honestly don't even know the answer to that question. I can tell you we're the biggest in Manchester. That's all I can tell you. I don't know it statewide.
Well, the last U.S. Census might have that. And there'd be a rough correlation between how many Francos there are and how many Franco voters there are. So
sure,
but I gotta think it's got to be 15% anyway.
Yeah, and I find it interesting how you're able to parse the difference between a Franco voter and a Catholic voter. You always assume that there would be a ton of overlap to the point where it'd be tough to
we never bothered to ask. We never bother asking about religion. It's we don't care. Again, if we know what we know somebody that says I'm a Frank, we give them a choice. Okay, what's your ethnic background? They say Franco-American. We don't care.
Sure.
Whether they're Catholic or Buddhist, okay,
right,
or perhaps Catholic or whatever. I don't think. I think that gave them a lot of identity early on, and that's certainly a way. I mean, the church and the Maines that go to church and all that. That's certainly a very powerful.
And you have the new one coming up all about Franco-Americans, which is fun.
Yeah, that's the one I think we've written 3 chapters out of the 7, and it's going to be absolutely revolutionary because we've got all this data that we never had before. Plus, we've got Julie's input into the cultural backgrounds and so on. But I mean, we'll have every election in Maine from 1960 to 2024 coded by Franco-American voters. And we've entitled the book Franco's Ascendant because whether they know it or not, they have rocked up to the #1 position in terms of who really matters in Maine. And I think, if I were a Franco-American, that's pretty important news to me.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, I'm curious, have you seen a discernible change in the way campaigns treats the Franco-American voter since you've had all this data available that you've been able to publish?
Democrats win in Maine, some of them because they know them. Janet Mills knows the Francos. She's governor. She speaks it. She's known them. She's seen all these other campaigns. But so many Democratic candidates, they don't even know the Francos are there, let alone that they matter so much. And the Democratic polling is never going to show them because there are no Irish Americans, there are no Franco-Americans in the template. So no wonder they don't know they're there, so they don't pay any attention to them. So it's a very strange thing, and I thank Julie for giving me credit. But once I figured it out and it worked for Bill Cohen, it worked for Olympia Snow, it worked for Dave Emery, it worked for Susan Collins. I mean, it worked for Angus King, it worked for Governor Longley. I mean, the Francos are there waiting for you to bring your message to them, and they'll tell you what they want to hear. They'll tell you exactly. I don't want to hear from that person. I want to hear from the nurse. I don't want to hear from the beautician. So we find the authority figures. We find the what we call the influence vectors, the things that will change people. The Francos tell us what they want. We give them what they want, and they thank us and for our cause. Or if we lose some, but we lose some because we just did a bad job of reaching out to the Francos.
I'm curious, what have they traditionally told you it is that they want? Who are these influencers? What are the influencers of the Franco vote?
They're all small business people in terms of how they, think of the average beautician in France. Do they want the government telling them to do this, or fill out this form? No. Franco-American voters are French voters, and there are no more people suspicious of government getting involved in my business than French people, right? I mean, some Franco-Americans, he said to me, my parents came from France. They have 3 sets of books. One is a set of books that when the IRS comes, they say, "Oh, here's how much money we lost last year," and then the IRS guy says, "No, come on, Emil. I want to see the real books." So they bring out the second set of books, and then he winked at me and he said, "But we never show them the third set of books." We'll look forward to coming back on when the French don't just get a chapter, they get the whole book.
Yes, we have to hype the whole. When is the book coming out?
Well, we haven't finished writing it yet, so I would say it's probably a year.
Okay.
But that whole book comes out of what we found in this book, and we said the Francos deserve a whole book. But in this one, we just say the Francos rule. And in this other one, we say how they got to rule.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate it very much. I'm going to connect again with Juliana. And when the book comes out, 100%, we'll have you guys back on so we can hopefully sell a bunch of books.
Well, thank you. You made it very, very interesting.
Now our fathers look at us and sigh with despair, to think that everything they love we simply do not share. But the spirit never dies, our culture will survive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive.
Special thanks to Josie Vachon for providing the music. You can find more about her at josievachon.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Mike Campbell. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at fclpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FCL Podcast for more information about the topics discussed. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this episode.